Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange. A judge in Madison puts up a temporary roadblock to prevent Governor Walker's collective bargaining law from taking effect. We will talk about it. We'll talk about the multiple disasters in Japan and what, if any, effect that has on our lives here in the United States. And we'll talk about the race between Chris Abele and Jeff Stone for Milwaukee County Executive. Time for introductions. We have newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over at WISN Radio. Denise Callaway is the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, first thing we'll talk about, Governor Walker's collective bargaining law. First, you have a Democratic Secretary of State who says he was in no rush whatsoever to get the thing published so the law could take effect. Now you have a Madison judge issuing a temporary order to prevent it from taking effect on the stated belief, she says, that lawmakers may have violated the open meetings law when they passed it. In the end, what's likely to happen?
It'll end up in the Supreme Court, and the actions that were taken by the legislature and the governor will be upheld. But it does shine a light on, first off, the process that was used. I think what will ultimately happen is a lot of the rules of both the Assembly and the Senate, more people will come to know more about them than they'd ever thought they'd want to know in life, because all of this stuff will be laid out piece by piece by piece, and everyone will have some reaction to it. Secondarily, there's always the option of going back and passing the law again if it's thought to be in some manner upheld that it was not passed properly. And the third is that they let the whole process ultimately get to the state Supreme Court, and that will then shine a light on the race for the vacant seat on the state Supreme Court and the importance of that race, fortunately for all those who would be involved, the importance of that race in either moving the Walker agenda forward or trying to thwart it in some manner.
Denise, do you see any surprises at the end, or will the Republicans eventually get what they want? It's just not as quickly as they want it.
I think the Republicans are eventually going to get what they want. I think the option that Gerard mentioned about the Republicans bringing everybody back, voting on it with proper notice, because I do think there was a real question about whether or not the open meetings law was upheld. And the judge, in issuing the temporary restraining order, said that she believed that the DA in Dane County did have substantial proof that the law, in fact, had been violated. So the easiest way to clean it up, at least as it relates back to whether or not this moves forward, would be for everybody to come back to have a discussion with everybody in the room, perhaps to listen to ideas from the other side of the aisle, and then vote on it. But at the end of the day, they've got enough votes, they're going to be able to pass it.
But Kevin, it's not like the state attorneys who gave the advice to the legislature, yeah, you can go ahead with this. It's not like they're idiots.
Oh, no.
They must know what they're doing, right?
I have a totally different perspective on what I just heard here. With all due respect to both of you, I don't foresee this going through litigation because that would only delay this whole episode, and that's no good because then you have to reissue those layoff notices. This could take, if you go through the courts, this could take 30, 60, 90 days. And I don't think the governor wants to do that. I don't think the legislature wants to do that. The quick and expedient thing to do is to call everybody back, give notice, and get people in the room, and then vote on it. And I believe strongly that this judge, and this is no shock that a Dane County judge would make this ruling. She needed to put her partisanship aside and take a refresher course in the law.
She was appointed by Governor Thompson.
Sure was. Tommy Thompson's judge.
Well,
Yes.
She was wrong on this one. And let me explain, because I've worked in Madison,
the law
and I
isn't
know
wrong.
I know how the parliamentarianism works there. You have the open meeting, you have the open meetings law. Fine, but the rules established by each house of the legislature supersede the open meetings law. When you're in a special session, as the legislature was to take up this budget repair bill, no advance notice is necessary except for placing the notice on the legislative bulletin board, which they did. But then the Senate chief clerk, my friend and former colleague Rob Marchant, who knows the parliamentary rules upside down sideways. He's, as a common courtesy, sent an email out to everybody 2 hours before the meeting started. This more than fulfills notice, but let's go back, get everybody back, and vote. The result will be the same, and that budget repair bill will be law.
But now if they call everybody back, do we see demonstrations again outside of the Capitol?
Yeah, you will.
I think that's the most hilarious performance Kevin has ever done here. To sit here,
You don't know
being
the
the
rules.
expert on the law, telling a judge that the judge doesn't know the law, telling the district attorney of Dane County doesn't know
They're
the
all
law.
partisan hacks.
She is not a partisan
That
hack.
woman was a conservative judge appointed by Tommy Thompson.
You will see legal experts in the next few days come out and rip her ruling.
Oh, yeah, people like you. You just called yourself
I'm a legal expert. Thank you.
It is absurd. It is totally absurd. You know, I really think people like Kevin and in the Republican Party have really discredited conservatives. You know what a conservative judge is? A conservative judge is a judge that follows the law. It's not one that tries to twist the law depending on, you know, who's before you. It's the judge that follows the law. This woman read the open meetings law, interpreted it correctly, as a matter of fact, and I got to say, Gerard, I hope this does go to the Supreme Court because
Then
I
people are
think
going to be laid off.
I want the spotlight on David Prosser. David Prosser, running for re-election to the Supreme Court, said at the start of his election he wanted to complement the Walker administration, and you should re-elect him because he will uphold what Walker wants to do. That's not the job of a Supreme Court justice. A job of a Supreme Court justice is to correctly interpret the law, not tell Scott Walker he can do anything he wants to do. So I'm glad that the Joanne Kloppenburg, David Prosser election is going to be in the spotlight, and I hope it is, because that is the most unethical thing I've ever heard a member of any Supreme Court say. I'm going to do whatever Scott Walker wants me to do.
And conversely, Kloppenburg said that she would be the one that would strike down any law that the Walker
No, she did not.
She has gone on record as saying that she
Kloppenburg works for the Republican Attorney General of this state right now.
And is
She also
told by every
that's why she's
liberal
running
source in
for
the
the
state.
state Supreme Court.
She also
because
worked
One at a
for
time, one at a time,
Don
one at a time.
Hanaway. She also worked for Don Hanaway, another Republican. She's worked for 2 Democratic Attorney Generals and 2 Republican Attorney Generals.
And none of their wisdom rubbed off on her.
But
that's why she's running.
Are you ashamed of the fact that David Prosser spoke to a statewide Tea Party convention in Wisconsin Dells last year and warned that some Jewish philanthropist was going to donate money to try to defeat him, and the Tea Party should rally together to re-elect him? Isn't that an embarrassment for Republicans?
Well, doesn't everybody know that all the justices on the Supreme Court, they are of one party or not? They are either liberal
They
or
are
conservative.
Sure they are.
But everybody
well, the race
knows.
is-
And money
They are
has entered the
nonpartisan.
Supreme Court races big
And
time.
big time. And in this
Because it's a
particular race,
necessity.
in this particular race, you're going to see more outside money being poured in,
By the Tea
specifically
Parties.
because, well, not
think
just
by
by the
both
Tea
sides.
Parties,
I
but you're
think
going to
by
see the
both
labor
sides.
unions come in for Kloppenburg too.
But you don't
So-
want to have a justice on the Supreme Court say, I'm here to uphold the Scott Walker?
Both, if, as what you say about Prosser is correct. And I know
is
David
correct.
Prosser. I like David Prosser. I think he's a man of high integrity.
He's a brother. He's solid.
I also believe that in this particular race, one of the things that Kloppenburg does have going against her is that she's already made up her mind as to what she thinks about Walker administration efforts.
hasn't.
Yes, she has.
She's going to decide on the facts, not go in saying I'm going to support Scott Walker.
But then why are there all the editorials from liberal publications like the Shepherd saying, "Oh, we got to get Kloppenburg in there"?
Because we have a Tea Party Supreme Court justice now who says he's going to uphold Scott Walker's agenda.
I think it's pretty clear if Joel
that is
McNally
unethical.
is coming on here and trying to divert attention away from the budget repair bill to ripping David Prosser, I think that tells you what a high-quality judge David Prosser
let's shift
really
gears.
is and how much he scares the liberals.
Shift gears for just a minute. What do you think about the move this week by some of the union organizations to say okay, if we've identified these companies, these organizations in Wisconsin, and if they don't come out for collective bargaining, like M&I Bank and Quick Trip, you should boycott them. Is that a smart
It's a
move or
scare
not?
tactic, and
It's
it's
putting
horrible to bash businesses with
economic
people
pressure.
with middle-income people who work at those places, and now you're saying don't patronize them, don't frequent them. Well, that's an assault on the middle class if I ever heard one.
Is it politics? Is that just one of the elements that you use?
It's one of the elements that you use, and
Business
it cuts. It's not. It's
Economic
not.
pressure.
I think what we have to kind of decide here is that this is not anti this or anti that. It's the opportunity that we have in America that if people don't like the way something happens, that a boycott is one of the ways in which they can do that. I'm sure people in Montgomery consider the bus boycott there anti-business when it took place. But the reality of it is that a boycott is a way that is met with varying degrees of success for people to express their displeasure over something that has happened.
And I would include,
they have every right to
property
do that.
damage and death threats as also other tactics
But that-
to use.
but that-
Well,
but
if you
no.
don't agree with me, here's what we're
But
going
Kevin,
to
that's not what I said. Let's not throw a boycott.
You should come on this program.
Let me finish, Kevin.
And
Let me
speak
finish.
out in opposition about some of the thuggery that's going on.
One at a time.
Let's not
Yeah.
call a boycott and put a boycott, which is a right that citizens have to peacefully show their dissatisfaction, and the same arena with death threats or criminal property damage. It's not the same
Isn't
thing.
the intent of a boycott to destroy or hurt somebody's business?
It is to punish the people who are financially supporting the other side. And yes, you want it. What people with money understand is economic pressure. You can make a moral arguments. You can say you should do what's right. You should tell them to, like, let's start following the law when you pass these things in the legislature. You can bring shame to them for breaking the law, but they don't care.
The intent of a boycott.
What they care about is losing money.
Boycott is to hurt those
boycott-
poor minorities that are working in gas stations,
intent
in
of a
grocery stores, and
boycott-
convenience stores.
The intent of
Wonderful,
a
you
boycott.
two.
You've never cared about the poor before.
Are either one of you going to let me finish? The intent of a boycott is to
explain.
draw attention to a situation that's occurred and to force action. That's what the boycott is intended to do.
It's to hurt and
No,
destroy
it isn't.
business.
It
It's
isn't.
an
It's to
anti-business ploy that rarely
this is-
works.
But the collateral
You're wrong,
damage,
Kevin.
the
You're
collateral
wrong.
damage falls on the
That's clever.
employees who
That's
work for
clever.
those companies.
It's true.
And that is part
by
of
the way,
what's
you didn't
going
get
to
it.
have to be examined by those who would use a boycott. I'm a child of the 60s. I don't have a problem with boycotts being used. What I do think is that in the thinking of those that would use the boycott, they should look at what the outcome is going to be of that boycott. And I really don't think that it's going to hurt those businesses. It will, if there's a business impact, it will hurt more directly those people who work for those businesses as opposed to the
It
people
will make
who
it
run
less
them.
likely they will underwrite the Republican Party.
I
next
doubt
time.
that.
right.
And more so, they'll probably come into the fold.
Let's talk for a few minutes about this catastrophic disaster in Japan. An earthquake is followed by a tsunami, which is followed by the possibility of nuclear disaster. This happening in a country which is so often referred to as the third most powerful economy in the world. What effects will this tragedy have on life here in the United States, do you think?
Well, I think one of the things that it causes us all to do is to take a look at nuclear power in a different light. You take a look at what the Japanese had done. They had prepared for virtually every disaster that they thought could have befallen these plants. But the reality of it is, when you have these plants that have the ability to cause, yes, to produce power and to do all other kinds of great things, but at the end of the day, if there's a malfunction, as there was here, to cause such terrific damage, I think it causes us to take a look at, or should give us some cause to take a look at, where we have power plants in the United States. Is it a good idea for us to have two major plants, nuclear plants, on the San Andreas Fault in Southern California? Probably not. At the end of the day, nature is a powerful force. And when we're dealing with something that has the potential to cause such damage and such harm as nuclear power, we have to be very careful with where we put those plants, all the safeguards that we have in place. It should cause us not to stop what we're doing when it comes to nuclear power, but to be much more careful about where we put it and to make sure that we have every possible safeguard in place. We've seen over the past year 2 disasters of epic proportions that we never could have imagined and that we thought we had every safeguard in place for. The Gulf disaster and now this in Japan. So, I think it has to be a reminder to us that this is oftentimes a fragile planet and that we have to be careful where we put these instruments that have the ability to do great good. But if something bad happens, also the power for tremendous harm to take place.
From an economic standpoint, does it dramatically hurt the United States?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are some consequences that are now just starting to evidence themselves. For example, getting parts for automobiles, and in this country, we purchase a lot of prepackaged parts, so to speak, from Japan. They're assembled in Japan. We ship them here, and they're assembled into automobiles that are further manufactured here in the United States. And we're not just talking about automobiles that are Japanese brand automobiles. In Louisiana, they just had to shut down a General Motors plant temporarily because it cannot currently get parts for its product that it was making out of that plant.
But could it end up helping the economy in the United States? Could those jobs come here?
Well, and there are some businesses that are looking to relocating. You have a number of executives or those who have the wherewithal to get out of Japan right now. If they do decide to relocate here, and there's a push made to try to bring entrepreneurs here into the United States, if we do manage to get them into this country and harvest some of their talents, I think that that might be a long-term positive consequence. But I don't see in the short run that having a significant impact on our economy.
Kevin, what do you think happens?
I think in the short and possibly in the long run, it's bad news for Japan. There's no playbook to go to tell you how to get out of this mess. They have many problems working against them, and I hate to be pessimistic, but from an economic standpoint, for the past 2 decades, they have built an incredible amount of debt. Yes, you mentioned they were the 3rd biggest economy in the world, or you did, Dan. Yeah, but they used to be number 2. Before things fell apart in the 80s. They have incredible debt. Their national output is only half of what their debt is. Demographically, they are a shrinking, aging population. They are the oldest nation in the world. How are they going to handle this incredible devastation with so much debt? And then will their bond markets be able to handle what is still an unknown final tab on the damage, which is going to be astronomical? Then they have political problems. You have their 5th prime minister in the last, 5 years, just hours before the tsunami hit the nuclear plant that really caused the damage. Even hours before that happened, there were calls for that prime minister's resignation. There's a split parliament. It's going to be very difficult for those people to come together and find it within themselves to get out of this mess.
And how about all the reports that show that maybe they're being less than truthful about the severity of the situation at the nuclear plant?
Yeah, I never believe governments when they tell us nuclear plants are safe and that it's less, don't worry about this. They told some of those workers they could now, take up to twice as much radiation as they've ever been allowed to before. The consequences for those workers are probably deadly. There's one more thing, though, one more big picture thing I'd like to add here. Besides the whole human arrogance about building nuclear plants that we can foresee, over the next 200,000 years, what's going to happen so we can keep them safe. That's absurd. But there's a reason why, these terrible, devastating natural disasters are happening with increasing frequency around this planet. And we know what it is. We know that it's global warming. We know that a lot of ignorant people don't want to deal with it, and a lot of are even saying, we shouldn't even worry about it. But the rapidity with which these enormous disasters they used to, take place, between generations, and now they're happening 2 or 3 or 4 a year sometimes. That's a consequence of global warming, these extremes, and we have to do something about it.
All right, let's talk for just a few minutes about the race for Milwaukee County Executive. You have millionaire Chris Abele against State Representative Jeff Stone. The bad press in the Journal-Sentinel continues for Abley the last few weeks. First, it was a story about him getting a bunch of parking tickets, then followed by stories about a drunk driving ticket from years ago and his refusal to talk about why he never graduated from college. Where the main criticism that the media seems to level at Jeff Stone is that he's too much like Scott Walker. I do wonder, I thought Abley, with all his money, was absolutely the favorite a few weeks ago, but I do wonder now if all this is going to start hurting him.
Well, I think the Journal-Sentinel coverage has been a total embarrassment to the Journal-Sentinel. Parking tickets, a 15-year-old first-time drunk driving offense, which isn't even considered a crime in this state. A first-time offense is considered a wake-up call, and every story has been written by a columnist. They haven't been written by a news reporter. They've been written by a columnist, and every story is this millionaire thinks he's better than anybody, and he doesn't have to follow the rules, and he gets parking tickets. Well, I get parking tickets too, and I'm not even a millionaire, and I pay mine just like Chris Abley pays his.
He doesn't pay his.
He absolutely did pay. He paid every single one of them.
He did pay.
And
when?
he paid them all. He paid them all.
But you're right.
And the Journal-Sentinel has repeatedly done this, and I think it's a total embarrassment. They haven't covered the race, and yeah, I think it is very important that Jeff Stone keeps voting for that budget repair bill, even though he says he's not in favor of killing collective bargaining, and he's been totally dishonest about that. That he wants to bring Scott Walker's policies back to Milwaukee County, and we know what the consequences of that are now. It is ugly. I think the Journal-Sentinel is trying to, they endorsed Abley in the primary. I think they're trying to wiggle out of it now and endorse Stone. Every time they cover a forum, they write about what Stone says and nothing about what Abley says.
I do get the same thing from Bice's columns that Joel does, that it makes you think, okay, this millionaire is not like the rest of us. But I don't think that's a bad thing. That's what I come out of the column.
You're better than everybody else. Because you're Chris Abley and you have all this money coming out of your armpits, that you don't have to accept responsibility.
Out of the column.
Well,
Bice wants you to say, here's a millionaire who's not like the rest of us. He doesn't follow the rules.
Well, last week on the program, I said people's minds are made up. There's nothing that could happen between now and the election at any of these dozens of forums that would make people change their minds. They're going to base their opinion on how each of the candidates feels about the state budget right now. But then all of this happens. And I'm sorry, it all adds up. The drunk driving, the waiting 7 years to appear in court, I had no idea what was going on, and the throwing up your hands and saying, I had no idea, and I accepted responsibility. No, you didn't accept responsibility. And this is the kind of stuff that resonates with voters. When you're running for a high office and you pull some of this stuff and then you won't answer questions and you dodge questions about not having a college degree, which has been a criticism of Scott Walker, and you come off looking really bad, I think that resonates with voters, and now it kind of swings the tables back to Jeff Stone. He's got a shot now.
The shame in all of this is that we're all sitting up here talking about, parking tickets and whether or not somebody was for something before they were against it. We're not talking about the real issues that impact Milwaukee County residents. We're not talking about the park system, transportation, mental health complex, the critical issues that we face there.
Because people aren't into that. They're into Dan Bice's column and the budget repair bill.
Column because that's all they see.
Okay, before we leave, please, let's turn back to Japan for just a minute. Rick Horowitz has also been watching what's happening there, and it's put him in a reflective mood. Rick.
Nothing bright and witty today, nothing sharp and clever, nothing with a sarcastic edge or a skeptical bite. No put-downs, no shout-outs, no policy fights, no partisan spats. Just sadness, deep, deep sadness and horror. The earth shakes and a country is brought to its knees. The earth shakes and the wave comes and everything is gone. Houses and schools, stores and ports and factories, all gone, all swept away in one horrifying instant. And the people swept away too. Please, you find yourself thinking, let it have been quick and painless. The alternative is somehow even more horrible to contemplate. The death toll, they're saying, could rise as high as 10,000. But then you think of the one town, a town of 17,000 until the wave came, and 10,000 disappeared in one town. They had families, hopes, struggles, dreams, routines, all gone in one town. So where are the stirring rescues? You wait for the stirring rescues, but there are so few of those and so many beyond saving. The sea will send some of the bodies back in its own good time, but rescues barely a handful. And then the radiation. On top of everything else, the radiation. Plumes of deadly gases venting, leaking, exploding into the air. Fires that can't be extinguished, burning at temperatures beyond comprehension. Words spilling from the TV screen, containment vessel and suppression pool. But what needs to be contained isn't being contained, and what needs to be suppressed isn't being suppressed. More words, fuel rods and reactor core and lethal dose and meltdown. Meltdown. The survivors lack food and drinking water, blankets and shelter. And now there's one more thing, unseen and venomous, hunting them down, haunting them. Can they run? For how long? And where? You find yourself watching the wind. Suddenly the direction of the Japanese wind matters terribly to you because it matters so terribly to them. Halfway around the globe, you're hanging on the news of every shifting breeze. Spare them this, you're thinking. After all the rest, at least spare them this.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.